Hello, everyone. My name is Joel Monteliski, and I'm Practice Chief Solution Architect, and thank you very much for joining today's webinar. Obviously, we are on a working from home environment. You can see from my background. No, this is not Practice Office. And so if there were to be any interruptions, I apologize up front. There are 3 kids, 1 dog, a couple hamsters, and a handful of fish going around outside, and their interactions are a little bit chaotic at times. So I hope it will pass okay, but if not, then I guess that we're most of us on the same boat at this point. So let's actually get started. Thanks for joining. Today's session is being recorded, so if you need to leave at any point in time, worry not. We will be sending it to you a little bit later on, I'm guessing tomorrow. By the way, the session also is live, meaning if you want to send any questions about anything that I'm saying, please try to use the Q&A. The chat is less recommended. But if you have any questions, please use the Q&A, and we will have some time towards the end to review them, hopefully. So let's get on with the show. So first of all, a little bit about me. Maybe some of you know me. I'm guessing that most of you don't. So my name is Joel, and I have been a tester for the, by the way, coming to you from Israel. This is where Practice headquarters reside. And since, I think, early March, I have been here. This is actually a picture that someone actually was commenting on, that it is the last picture of me on a plane. And as you can see, it was during the very beginning of the COVID days. We didn't know what to expect, and we were still flying at least. And I am a tester. I've been testing for the last 22, 23 years. And this is what I love. And testing is what I love and what I do. And I've been almost every single job that you can have in testing, including consultant and QA manager and director and what's not. Within Practice, I'm the Chief Solution Architect of the system. That is a pretty cool job because I get to talk to tons and tons and tons of testers and testing teams and understand how they're working, and basically reflect that into the system to know what to continue doing next. But I also get to, again, talk about testing stuff with people. And one of the cool things about working in Practice is that I get to do other interesting testing stuff, like my podcast with my friend Rob Lambert called Testing One-on-One. You can check it out. There's a project called the State of Testing Survey and Report, which is a yearly report that I do with my friend Lalit Kumar right now from Sync, but you might know him from the Tea Time with Testers magazine, that we survey basically what's going on in the testing world once a year. And the online test conf, that's I think one of the coolest projects that we have, and I will talk about it in a minute because the next one is just around the corner. Important, I mentioned my family. This is my family. Actually, it's a picture of a year ago when we didn't have COVID and when we were doing sand surfing, as weird as it sounds, pretty cool. Entertainment, fully recommended. As I mentioned, 3 kids, 1 wife currently working, and myself. And I want to plug a couple of things. First of all, the guys who are sponsoring this event, Practice, the company where I work in. If you haven't heard about Practice, go ahead and read a little bit about it. It's a pretty cool QA management solution. We're looking to solve the QA issues differently. We're basically looking not where testing is today, but where testing as a whole is going to be in a couple of years, and creating a platform for that. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, it's already reflected in there about how do we need to look into the bigger picture and make sure that we can streamline the process and make sure that everyone is working with the system, and a lot about increasing visibility and communication throughout the whole testing ecosystem. Again, just go ahead and check it out, www.practice.com. And you don't need to trust us. We have hundreds and hundreds of testing teams all over the world, all across the world and industries. And again, obviously I'm biased, but it's a pretty recommended tool. And I already saw some faces, names here of people who are working with the system. So glad you could join. And for the rest of you, just go ahead and sign up. Last plug before we actually get into the process. And this is, I mentioned very briefly, this is a project that is very dear to me. It's called the Online Test Conf. It's a process that we have been doing for the last 4 years. And the whole idea began for all of us who were not able to travel to conferences, and this, we're talking way before COVID, we're talking about 4 years ago, where we realized that the world, testing world was divided into two: those who could fly to conferences and were getting all this information from very high level and important testing minds and all these ideas, and those who couldn't fly for many reasons, starting from budget all the way to the company they work with. Again, many, many reasons. So we started doing an online testing conference and bringing all the big guns, all the big names in order to talk in those conferences. And it has been a tradition. We do it twice a year. And we're always improving it based on the feedback. So the sessions, actually, it's 3 days of conference, December 1st until the 3rd, where every day is on a different time zone, meaning one day is more focused on the Americas continent, the other one's on the EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and the last day is actually APAC time. Doesn't mean that you cannot sign to all the sessions. Obviously you can, and you will get recordings, and you can attend whenever you want, and there's some crazy people that we love that stay up at different times of the day just to be in the sessions, and it's great. We're implementing something a little bit different. In addition to the 4 sessions we always do, we're going to start doing workshops, and workshops are going to be limited. So once they're open, go ahead and sign up for them. And the whole idea, and again, a lot of people are trying to do it right now on the current conferences, have collaboration and stuff like that. We have been doing it for the last 4 years. We already have it very, very fine-tuned, and it's cool because not only do you get to listen to a lot of interesting people, way more interesting than myself, and you can see some of the names that we have for this session, and incredibly happy to have Maret and Pete Wallen and Anne-Marie Chard doing great sessions, the great Paul Gerard and the very, very interesting Mark Townsend. These are only some of the names that are going to be there, and it's 100% free. So just go to www.onlinetestconf.com, sign up, and once the workshops are open, try to sign up to those. Those are going to be limited times, or a limited number of people, because again, those are workshops. But that's enough of the plugs. It's almost 10 minutes after the hour. Let's start talking about what we came here to talk about. And we're here to talk about stop focusing on testing. And I did the session live at the beginning of the year, and I said, hey, stop focusing on testing. People were like, okay, yeah, how come? And yeah, that's what I'm here to talk to you about. We should really, really, really put our efforts into stop focusing on testing. And let me help you out. First of all, by getting started with a question, okay? And this is an important question, and I really want you to think about it. If you can, even write down the answer for that. My question is simple, or not. What value do you provide to your company? And by value, I mean, how do you influence the bottom line of your company? And it's a tough question to ask a tester, and it's on purpose, okay? And I want you to think about it, and I want you to write it down. And if it's hard for you to think about it, let me help you out a little bit. Think about, for example, what decisions do you help to make as part of the process? How do you change the way that your company is delivering products? Think about all the time since you started the company all the way until today. How has it been changing? And more importantly, think if you were not there, what would be different? And not you, I don't mean John or Mark or Angie or Maria or whoever is there. No, you, I mean your position. If it wasn't there, being, I don't know, test manager, testing consultant, test engineer, automation engineer. If you were not there, how would it be different? And I want you to write that down, and I want you to hold on to these answers. And we'll get back to them in about 20, 30, let's say 35 minutes from now, okay? Now let's get on with what I wanted to share with you. So I'm a pretty big believer in evolution, okay? I see evolution everywhere I look. I see evolution, obviously, in the biological sciences. I see evolution in political sciences. I see evolution in history. I don't believe in revolutions. I believe only in evolutions. And even if you notice the big revolutions, let's say the French Revolution, it was an evolution of different small steps converging into a big, let's say, cataclysmic thing. And even that continued all the time evolving. And I think that it's the same with processes. Process evolve constantly. They fine-tune themselves. They get better with time as they incorporate more things. And this is also the point with the software development process. If we focus on software development, and I'm going to start from the time where I joined, let's say software development around late 90s. Back when I got started, everyone was talking about waterfall models. And if you bought a book or if you went into, again, there were not a lot of webinars that I attended, but if you opened the book, then you would see a lot about the waterfall model. Now, that was also around the time where people started talking about the V model. And we will go into that a little bit more in depth in a couple of minutes. And then after, let's say, the big boom of the early 2000s, then we started seeing, even late 90s, but early 2000s started seeing more, all the iterative processes. And we know now, a lot of us talk about Scrum and Agile and stuff like that, but it got started way back, a lot earlier than that, with iterative processes. And after iterative processes, Agile and what's not, then a lot of us think that the latest incarnation, the latest step in the evolution of software development processes is what we call DevOps. Now, I want us to look a little bit into how this has been changing when we focus mostly on the testing perspective, okay? If we start from the V and waterfall models, and again, V and waterfall are extremely related, mostly because if you notice the V model, it's an extension of the waterfall model when you start saying, hey, we're gonna put parallel testing operations that are based on the information that we get from the previous site. So those are there, but if we focus only on the task of the testing team or how it affects testing, then these are the things that I think are most important for us that we can take from the V and waterfall models. First of all, back then, we thought that we could start a project where requirements were completely ready and complete. Meaning we got, and I kid you not, either documents or books saying, hey, these are your requirements. Go ahead and develop those, okay? Someone sat with a customer and we went step by step, thing by thing, and this is what we need to have at the end of the process. There was no inputs from anyone from within the development team into how requirements were done. Another very important part back then is that both development and testing were completely separated. So much so that it was not strange to see not only teams, well, maybe teams could work in different countries, but even within the same country, they would be in different buildings. It was not strange for me to be working in a company, a large company, where, oh, the development team is in that building and we're in here because the testing team sits together and we work separately from development. We used to work based on cycles, and cycles merge into larger releases. A cycle could be anything from within, I don't know, 2 weeks to 3 months, and a big release could be anything from, again, a small release could be 3 months, a large release could be 18 months, 18 planned months that would develop into 24 months. And yes, we release products once every 2 years, and the market was okay because the market didn't know that there was an alternative to that. If you had a big product, then you needed to deliver it only once in a very, very long time, and you could have service packs or small stuff in the middle, but no, the big product once every year and a half or so. And something important here, we used to develop stuff that was shipped to someone else outside of the team, outside of the company. Basically, either floppy disks or CD-ROMs, we used to burn them and send them. And just to give you an idea, once we were done with the release process, then we basically gave a master CD to the production department, and they made a first batch of 100 CDs that they sent via express mail to our big customers, and the rest they were started to be sent. So it took around a month after we released the product where we were not even expecting to hear anything from customers about the system because no one was installing it. And it was not strange to start getting the first wave of feedback, either bugs or hoorays or anything, 3 to 6 months after the release of the product. So yeah, you release it every 18 months, but people are not installing all the time. And more important is that the feedback that we got as a development organization didn't come directly from users. We couldn't get it ourselves. It was always through third or fourth channels. The customer talked to their representative, the representative opened a support call, and the support call got to us. if we were really, really lucky, the customer would open a ticket to the support call. The support call will talk to someone in development, and then maybe we would see some information there. But we never had direct access to feedback from customers. If we look into the objective of the testing team in those models, they sound really strange, but we were expected to find all the bugs before we released the product. And I'm not kidding. I mean, if you work there, you know what I'm talking about. All the bugs. You were supposed to only sign on the product where all the bugs have been found. Maybe some of them you would not fix and they went into the release notes, but everything should have been found before. And they used to come to us complain about how did we miss this bug, this very large bug. And so that's why also, for example, after the product was completely developed, then it took about a month and a half only of testing to release the product because you had to find all the bugs. And the whole idea was that, again, we should ensure that the final product had reached a desired level of quality stability. But the emphasis here is in finding all the bugs. And again, the final product was there. I guess that a lot of people realized that this was very, very difficult, if not impossible to do. And so we started moving into other models. And that's where we're coming to iterative models. And a lot of people think that iterative models came because development wanted to work on shorter cycles. That's not the case. The reason that we got iterative models was because the market, the people who were selling the product says, we cannot wait another 18 months for that. Customers need to get, I mean, the competition is killing us. In order to give a new feature, we need to give it faster. And so the market forces made us think about ways of how can we deliver products faster. And so very smart people came into that idea that, hey, we can break down a very large project into smaller chunks and start iteratively going into that. Again, I'm not going to talk about Agile right now. I'm assuming that you guys know quite a lot of it, but it didn't came from development. It actually came from the outside. We were forced to do it because it was what was required from us. Now, again, let's try to do it quicker now. Development and testing started working as an integrated group. If we had only 3 weeks a month to deliver a product, we could not be working very, very separately. Another thing that we understood is that user stories were never done when the user or the user advocate or the user representative was there. There was a lot of feedback that came from the development team as well. That's why user stories continue to be developed and reviewed within the team, and that's important. It was also defined that development should take a more active part in testing, and I'm using here, again, air marks on that because it was supposed to be the case. It wasn't always the case, and a lot of people who are doing Agile are not doing that. I see it all the time. And again, it can still be Agile even if developers don't test. I think it's bad Agile, but you can still do it. We moved from very large sessions to shorter sprints, where the idea was to release in a sprint maybe only the MVP, part of the functionality, MVP as in minimal viable product, something that people can actually use and give us feedback, and then with that feedback continue delivering. But there was still something missing. I'm talking here maybe at the very initial stages of the web. I'm not talking about the time where we had mobile phones and everything was online. So things were still being shipped outside, and we still had to wait for that feedback. It took less time, but it still didn't get to us directly. Why? Because it still came from support, it still came from sales. It wasn't something that we could measure and actually see ourselves, okay? Now, we have been working Agile for 20 years. By the way, we work on waterfall and V models for about 30 years, so that's no surprise. And people are still working on that. And that's where, oh, something that I missed, sorry for that. I'm actually skipping before myself. The objective of the testing team was also very deeply shifted when we moved to Agile. The idea is not to find all the bugs, but we need to work with development in order to try to test and deliver these products quickly. We're trying to get feedback from the field. Because the idea is to do it quick, people might be a little bit more open to getting not the highest quality and having some minor bugs in there because we could fix them relatively quickly in a couple of weeks or months. So the idea here was less, hey, you are responsible for finding all the bugs. It was, okay, let's try to find all the important stuff and then, again, release as quickly as we can. And as I mentioned, after working in Agile, then something happened and we got into what is called DevOps. And I'm guessing that a number of you are already working DevOps. I've been working DevOps for a number of years now, but it's important to understand that DevOps also it's an evolution. And it's actually a convergence of two separate evolutions. On the one hand, we had this process evolution. We moved from very large process into very short iterations. Okay, we were basically releasing every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, and our development team was releasing, sending that products to someone else. And what happened was that in parallel to that, the internet revolution actually came in. And it started with the .com. If you were in the 2000s in California, then you remember pets.com and stuff like that. It was a very crazy time to be there, but everything started going online. And at the beginning, people thought that it was only websites, that only stores, and then it became platforms. And so, for example, Practice, it's only online. We don't have a disk no one can install other than our team. And so what happened was that we used to have two teams, a development team on the one side, releasing products every 2 weeks, and then we would ship it internally to our operations team. They were in charge of the servers, and they had to, within those 2 weeks, install it and run it and basically catch all the different small bugs that were in there, fine tune it, and start passing along feedback. And what happened was that the ops team was asking to make the product simpler to install, and so the development team needed to understand better how do they work on those operations environments and start learning more about the operations team. And we were asking the operations team to fix those small bugs already in the code. So we started getting closer and closer together until we understood that we could actually merge those two teams. And so the idea of DevOps is, okay, we need to merge it, it makes sense to merge it, so let's have one team that is in charge both of developing and running the software. And that's why we have DevOps. It's two teams merged into one that they need to be able to, first of all, obviously do all the agile cycle of planning, coding, building, and testing the software. But then we do the operations part that it's releasing the software, obviously internally. This is the handshake, deploying it into our servers, make sure that we can operate it, and all the time monitor what's going on in there. Now, both the deploy and monitor, it's very, very important to us because it's going to be key to what I'm going to be talking about now. DevOps feels a lot like Agile, and there are a lot of things doing wrong DevOps that haven't made that switch of how it is different from Agile, because it's not like we used to send the product to someone else. We are in charge of deploying the product. We run the product in our production environments. Now, this might look like a task, a chore that we need to do, but that is giving us an incredible opportunity to get that feedback from customers directly from the product, meaning we don't need even to talk to customers in order to understand if the product is good or bad. I can give you an example. We saw in Practice, and I'm talking here about 3 hours ago, we saw an exception on our servers that was pointing to a bug on the code. We went and fixed it, and were able to talk to the 3 customers that had experienced that before they even reported the bug into Practice today. And we're able to do it because we're operating the system, and this is only for bugs. But if you look at it, let's say that we're releasing a new feature, and we knew, for example, that before we added that enhanced functionality, we had 50,000 people working daily with that feature out of 150,000 possible people working with the system. Let's say that after we release the feature, we can measure if from 50 we jump to 75,000, meaning there's an increase in usage, or a decrease in usage, meaning we can even measure that feedback directly. So we're able to know how people are using the system. We can click, for example, if you're an e-commerce site, you can measure if you're making more money or less money with what you're doing right now, because you can measure it directly from the website. And on top of that, the cost of releasing bugs went down radically. Back in the day before we had DevOps, even in the Agile days, there used to be a curve saying, oh, if you find the bug on design, it costs this much. If you find it on programming, that much. If you find it on testing, that much. And if you find it on production, it's like yay much, because it costs quite a lot in order to fix it. Not anymore, okay? If we find the bug in production, instead of waiting 3 weeks and everyone being down, it can take us a minute if we do it correctly to correct that. Okay, so the rules of the rules of the game change radically when we move into DevOps. So it's like Agile, but very, very different than Agile, and that is something we need to understand. The objective then of the testing team, it's also different, because here we're more into how do we work in order to release quickly, but how do we enable stability during the process and during production itself? How can we bring that feedback back from production in order to fix stuff quickly? Okay, the whole idea of where testing ends shifted, because it used to be the case that the testing process ended with those CDs that we shipped to other people. Now testing doesn't end there, because we are in charge of the production environment. So if we're in charge of those environments, then we're in charge of also testing those environments. We're in charge of the quality of those environments. We're in charge of how those environments behave. So the objective actually has changed quite a lot. Okay, and we need to understand that. Now, but let's go back into our evolution, because someone might think that, oh, that's it, guys. So the new way of testing is DevOps, and let's go and make sure that we test the environments before we release them, and we're done. And thanks, Joel. Bye-bye. Let's go and have a beer. Nope. I'm sorry, but that's not the case. Or maybe I'm happy to tell you that's not the case. If you look into our evolution, then we started with the waterfall model that turned into the V model when we added testing into the mix. And then because market was asking for it and developers were bored, then we got into agile or iterative models. And because we got the internet to play with us, then we got the DevOps models in here. But it doesn't stop there. If you have been listening to what's going on the internet, and thankfully so, at least for me, I like listening to webcasts and reading quite a lot and going to conferences. There's something in the air that is not that new anymore, that it's called modern testing. You know what? Let's try to do this. You have the option of raising hands. I want to see a raise of hands. How many of people in the session have heard about modern testing up to now? 2, 6, 7, 10, 9. Okay, about a quarter of people here have heard of modern testing, and or less, because right now it's 4. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about modern testing. By modern testing, I don't mean testing on the modern age. It's not about that. I'm talking about the modern testing as a testing approach. And let's talk about it a little bit. As I mentioned, I do read quite a lot. Modern testing is one of the things that when I first heard about it, I didn't know how to read it or approach it, but it came from people that I really liked. So I started getting a little bit more interested into that. Oh, come on, work. So modern testing is not testing in modern times. It's a new approach, or a different approach, or an expanded approach of testing. Modern testing is the brainchild of 2 pretty cool guys, Alan Page and Brent Jensen. They have something called the A/B Testing Podcast, or it started, I think, over 4 years ago, or even more than that. And it started back when Alan and Brent were working in the same company. They were both working in Microsoft. Now, Brent is still in Microsoft. He's not a tester anymore. He's a data scientist, and Alan actually moved into another company called Unity something, forget about it. But in any case, and he's more of a director of quality and processes than anything else, maybe a little bit of a PMO. And they started with, in their podcast, to talk about a concept that they like, and then they gave it a name. They call it modern testing. And you can go to moderntesting.org, by the way. I'm not taking any credit for what they did, but I do want to talk to you a little bit about it and how that actually changed my perspective. Because at the beginning, they started talking about modern testing, and I had a rough time because they were saying a lot of things that I should be doing that I didn't feel I should be doing, or maybe I thought it would be cool to do it, but I didn't know how to do it. But as I read more about it, I understood that there was quite a lot of the things that we were already doing in practice, and I was doing already professionally, and the things that we're not doing, maybe those are things that are worth doing. So I started reading more about it. So if you go into moderntesting.org, unless they changed that lately, this is how it would look like. And you will see that they have, again, the statement and the principles. And if we start from the statement of modern testing, it might be like the objective that we talked about before. The statement of modern testing as a school of testing or as a way of approach of testing is to accelerate the achievement of shippable quality. We're obviously thinking in the context of a very agile, even DevOpsy approach. And the goal of modern testing, again, not modern testers, this is also a change of modern testing as an approach, is to make sure that we can accelerate the achievement of shippable quality. It's hard to grasp this at the beginning. So another thing that they did is they put together a list of principles that you can follow in order to make sure that you're working aligned with the modern testing approach. And again, you can take only part of them if you want, but they say if you want to be aligned with the process, then you need to work with these principles. And they have 7 principles. I'm going to go over them very, very quickly. Because this is not a modern testing session, obviously. The first that they put is the priority of modern testing is improving the business. Okay, and here is the question of if there's a bug that no one will find, do we need to report it even? If there is something that doesn't affect the business, the bottom line of the company, no, you shouldn't. Okay, we're here in order to be a business unit, to make sure that we're not here for the sake of quality, we're here for the sake of the business. Our job, and we already talked about it, is to accelerate the team using models such as lean thinking and theory of constraints in order to help to, and this is the important part, identify, prioritize, and mitigate bottlenecks from the system. And look at the way that they're saying it's not only how we need to accelerate, but not by finding all the bugs. No, we need to look into those bottlenecks and find ways of solving them. Okay? Bottlenecks mean everything that it's not done in a way that it's efficient enough in order to be good. We are a force of continuous improvement. We help the team to adapt and optimize in order to succeed rather than providing a safety net to catch all the failures. We need to all the time be looking into how to improve, okay? We need to be very critical thinking, look into how things can be better. Our job is not to find all the bugs before the product goes out. We don't need to find even a single bug from developers. That is what they need to do. They're developing the code, they need to find the bugs. We're here in order to make sure that the process is good enough in order to do things correctly. We do care deeply about the quality culture of our team, and so we're constantly coaching, leading, and nurturing the team towards a quality culture. And this is a very important point. And by profession, I'm an industrial engineer. Before I got into testing, I was studying industrial engineering, and actually finished my degree. And something that they teach us in industrial engineering is the process is the key of having a good product. So if you're doing quality culture is not how do we inject quality into the system, is how do we have a good process so that at the end we will have a good product. And that is what we're here to do. 5th principle is that we believe that the customer is the only one capable to judge and evaluate the quality of the product. Even if we're testers in a team and we say, hey, I think that this is an important bug because it will affect the quality of the product, this is only a hypothesis that we have. We cannot, the only person who will be able to judge is the customer. And the question that I had back then is, hey, I don't have one customer, I have tens of thousands of them. So the customer becomes this blob of your thousands of customers who are constantly saying if you're doing a better job or not a better job. And we can talk about that a lot. You can measure it, obviously, in many, many ways, and you should measure it in many, many ways, but it's not something that you can define internally. It's only something that you can measure when you look into the users. And so we get into principle number 6. We use data extensively to deeply understand customer usage and close those gaps between the product hypothesis and the business impact. So this is interesting because, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the product team, maybe your product owner, maybe product marketing, saying, hey, we need to have this killer feature and add it into the system. Their hypothesis is that if we add that feature, business will be impacted in a good way. We will sell more, we will gain more, people will be happier, they will recommend us more, they will grade us better on I don't know, on iTunes, whatever. Our job is to use data in order to prove them right or prove them wrong. Whether that impact analysis is correct or not, after we release the product. So we're testing after we release the product. And last but not least, we expand the testing abilities and knowledge across the team, understanding that this may reduce or even eliminate the need for a dedicated testing specialist. This is the place where you say, because we're teaching people how to test, we might not need testers anymore because developers will know how to test. So why do we need testers in the first place? Yes, we might be working ourselves out of a job, but this is a good thing because that means that our job as quality engineers is not necessarily to do testing. There are other things that we can do, and I will talk extensively about those other things. But basically, and I said before, when I read these principles, I didn't know how to approach them. Some of them everything sounded correct, but it sounded too theoretical in some points. And it took me a while to understand how to basically drill them down into more actual things. How can we actually implement them and bring them to practice? And more importantly, how can we decouple that seek mindset? Then testing is the job of the quality engineer. And if I'm a developer, I should be spending my time on more useful things, such as writing code or drinking coffee, than testing code, because that should be done by someone else. More importantly, if we go back after understanding or going over those principles, and we look again at the accelerate the achievement of shippable quality, if this is the slogan on the top, the way that we need to approach this, how do we achieve this acceleration of shippable quality, is by switching our mindsets as quality engineers from focusing on testing and focusing now on quality assurance. So we started from testing. How can we focus into quality assurance now? Okay, or start from testing, quality assurance, based on what we have on the screen, and you see the arrows. So let's talk a little bit about what does this mean to your team tomorrow. And again, this session came from me talking to a friend who said that I should explain how I actually made this approach. And my focus was mostly on quality and not on testing. And if you've seen my presentations before, if you've talked to me, then you know that I like to structure things that I do, and I have whiteboards and I have mind maps and stuff like that to help me slice and dice my way of thinking so that I can put it into words. And this is basically what I did when I started to think, okay, what does it mean to focus on quality and not on testing? And how can I break it down into more operations? This is what we're doing right now. So this is my mind map. This is what works for me. And we will share it with you, and you can get it if you want, and you can send me an email, I will send to you. But you need to understand that this is my mind map, and you need to develop your own mind map. It might have parts of this, but what works for you and your organization, obviously. Let's take a closer look into this so you can get a little bit of examples on what does it mean to focus on quality and not on testing. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to start going over each one of these branches and try to understand how does that look in practice. So let's start from the beginning. User story validation. It's incredible how many times we see them again and again. Most of the issues is when we start developing a feature that is only half-baked, where the user story hasn't been validated through and through. So how do we do that user story validation? What does it mean to validate the user story? So for me, it actually means that the quality engineer in the team needs to focus on the following things. First of all, if we're working on DevOps, we're generating MVPs. What's an MVP? It's a minimal viable product. It's the smaller release that we can do in order to validate the functionality. Yes, if you're expanding, that's another story. But if you're just getting started with a feature, how do you start with the bare minimum that it's enough for your customer to understand what you want them to do and to give you feedback on that? So how do you strip it down at the most? It's a very, very hard thing, and it's something that it's part of the quality culture. How do we define that measurable success criteria for production? And I talked about it a number of times. So, our hypothesis is that it's going to affect positively business value. How are we going to see that? Do we need to wait to get the reviews on Google Play? That's going to take a lot of time. Can we check that before? Can we see it based on patterns of usage changes? People need to press more here. People need to press more there. If we do number two, then okay, once we know what we need to measure, then we need to add those instrumentation monitoring purposes. Meaning we need to define on the user story, not only do we need that feature, this is how we're going to measure, make sure that you have those logs or blocks or measurements that you're going to be tackling. And monitoring is a very, very big point. We're going to be talking about that as well. A lot of times there are going to be conflicts and inconsistencies, especially if your product grows. A lot of times, oh, we're defining this, but wait a second, didn't we do something similar in that area of the product? Are we cannibalizing our product? Did we already develop that? Maybe we can actually leverage part of those in here. That's important. I have been seeing a lot of different sessions lately on usability and accessibility. This needs to be part of the user story validation. Okay, oh, wait a second, do we need to have keyboard shortcuts? How do we reach that? All of that needs to be there. And very, very important is to capture inputs from other departments. A lot of times we start developing something, and when it reaches the field, then customers, a success or customer support can come, hey, but did you know that that very strategic customer had a lot of ideas around that and we didn't implement it? Why? Why did we need to come up with the idea from ourselves instead of actually getting ideas from the field from people who actually know about that? So all of those fall under user story validation, and those are things that you can do tomorrow if you want, today, depending where you are. Let's talk a little bit about bringing customers into the process. So it's impossible to bring all your customers into the process. Unless you have one user, and if that's the case, tell me what you do. It will be very difficult to bring them. So one of the things that you need to do is to make sure that the people who are working, developers, testers, everyone who's working in the team, has some contact with customers. So go ahead and take part of customer calls with support and services or sales. We do it constantly. So people in our development team are going to be doing part of, meaning we put them to run support duties, to talk to customers. If possible, we make them interact, not because the customer needs them as much as because I believe that every engineer needs to understand how customers actually work so they can do their jobs better. Because it's not possible to do it all the time, then I do suggest to work with personas. Personas are user profiles that will help you to bring a lot of the things that are important to the user into the screen so that we can develop it correctly. One of the things, for example, persona is a set of attributes. So what's their age? What do they do for a living? Are there maybe sport enthusiasts or not, depending on where you are. Try to think about the things that are important, because if you're developing, for example, an app for your iPhone and you're making it for older people, then part of the persona is that those guys have glasses. And if they don't have their glasses on, they still need to use the system. So try to think about those attributes in here. And whenever possible, try to bring data for user development. So a lot of time, if you can bring, for example, environments that people are using, especially if they found bugs in the past, it's important to bring them in. Now, part of what modern testing was saying is that in order for us to focus on quality, we need to make sure that someone's focused on testing. And so who's going to be focusing on testing? And the answer here is simple, everyone else. In practices, for example, developers test, customer support test, everyone actually tests. So we're constantly doing training and coaching and enablement of testing. So for example, whenever there's someone new in the team, they go over test training. And this is something that I actually got from a friend that works in Adidas in Spain and Germany. Every new developer that joins the team, he or she will undergo test training, okay? And it's easier when they don't have experience in other teams, but even when they do and they're working in practice people know that they need to work with testing, and they do testing. But they don't really know how to test, so we teach them how to test. We have a very defined test process that it's easy to follow, so that it's not very extensive. I don't expect my developers to test as a tester, but they need to test well enough, even if they do it as developers. One of the things that we do as part of training and coaching is pair testing sessions, and I do them quite a lot. And remember, the idea of pair testing is you take someone and you sit with them. At the beginning, maybe the tester will do most of the driving, the other person will see, and you will have your keyboard and your mouse, and you will be doing that. But as the session progresses, then you let the other person start doing, and you sit quietly on the side and only give feedback when needed, and maybe you write down stuff, and only at the end you actually provide that feedback. A lot of briefings and debriefings with developers. It's really, really important. The idea of briefing is before you get into testing, what should they test? But even after that, based on what we found, what other ideas for testing do we have? And I'm talking not only on exploratory testing that many of us do that already, I'm talking on scripted testing as well. So it's important to do that. Test enablement, it's completely different than test training and coaching. Test enablement means how can we help our developers to test better? How can we give them tools that they will need to test better? So for example, we have what is called a testing cookbook. We talked about the processes, but processes might be too high level. Testing cookbooks is like, oh, these are the best practices. These are some checklists that you can have step by step, a complete cookbook. How do you approach a testing operation? And again, it's not a large book. It's a page on Google Docs, but at least whenever they get something new, they can go over that and make sure they tick all the boxes. Test environment generation. You remember all the, oh, it doesn't happen in my machine? That's because you don't have the data or the environment set up correctly. So why don't we give them environments to test on and put it on Dockers that have realistic data and setups? Oh, that's a great idea, but go ahead and do it. Unless you actually make a task for that, you won't do it because it takes time. Also, don't expect your developers to just come up with a test. You need to help them having test artifacts. What's a test artifact? Use them all the time. Your checklist, your test steps, your tests, all of those are your testing artifacts, but developers will need their own testing artifacts. For example, developers don't like scripted testing that much. You can give them high-level scripted tests, but they prefer to have checklists. Okay, we can give a checklist. We can have heuristics. They love heuristics, and there are countless heuristics out there you can give them. If you're going to be giving them a scripted test, try to make it a sanity or smoke scenario, so things that will actually help them approach that better. Now, all of that was before, during the development and testing process. Now, remember, we're on DevOps now, so our job doesn't end when the product is done. Basically, the second part of our product starts when we need to deploy and release the system. So just as you would approach every single feature by trying to analyze it, understanding what is the risk that you have in there, you do the same with the deployment process. And by the way, the cool thing or the interesting about the deployment process is that you seldom deploy the whole system. You usually deploy small parts of the system. You don't need even to work on microservices platforms to do that, even on large scale platforms, other types. Then every single release, every single project will have different risk assessments. Some of them will have a database migration, some of them not. Depending on that, you will need to know how do you manage that process to release. Do you need to do a stage process? Do you need to do an alpha, beta, stuff like that? You need to make sure that you're able to test both how do you deploy and also how do you roll back the system, okay? Don't only try to deploy it, say, okay, let's assume for a second something went wrong. How do we go back to a system that people can actually work with? Why? You want to plan and design it because if you need to make that decision to roll back, you want to do it in a number of seconds, maximum minutes. And so you want to plan ahead, so you need to think when that happens. And obviously scheduling notification, and I'm hearing here about scheduling, oh, is there gonna be downtime? So we need to schedule on the weekend, no downtime, cool. Do we need to notify people? If they're gonna be pressing refresh and seeing a whole new GUI, then it makes sense to notify them, to make sure they expect that and they're not surprised by that as well. Production analytics. This is the new testing, or this is the testing when you're working in production. You have literally tens of thousands of people, hopefully hundreds of thousands of people, even better, you have millions of people working with your product. Exceptions in the code will happen. Most exceptions are not even something that the user feels. So how are you able to make sense out of that noise? Because there's going to be a lot of noise. And for that, you need to plan how are you going to be measuring, monitoring, and analyzing what's going on in production. A big part of it, it goes into instrumentation and planning within it. So what's instrumentation? Very similar to when you're doing automation, that you need to instrument. How do you get to a part? Here's instrumentation about measurements. Okay, do I know whenever someone clicks on that button, do I have an event that I can actually log and do statistics on that? Or no, we only know that they loaded the page and we don't know if they pressed on that. So you need to think about what behavior you want the user to do, How are you going to be measuring that and instrument it? Okay, you need to instrument what is called feature validation analytics. Okay, so we released that. How do we know if it's successful or not? Once you have that, and obviously you need to have it for all the features, or at least for all the new features and most of the areas, then you can start generating what is called product health dashboards. Now, personally, I believe in 2 levels of dashboards. You have like a high level product health, like, okay, people are using more of this or more of that even. You can count exceptions and say, oh, we have more exceptions now. And again, measure that according to time, and you will be able to be very predictive on how this system is doing. But also you will want to zoom in on those strategic customers. Maybe strategic because they're very large and a lot of your revenue comes from there. Maybe strategic because this is a part of the product that these guys are the early adopters. So if they like it, that means that you're on the right path. If they don't, then you can get feedback from them. Okay, make sure that you can generate those dashboards. And you want dashboards because it's very hard to make sense out of the whole noise that you have in there. So you need to have dashboards in order to get to that data quickly. And finally, one of the things that people, again, don't do quite a lot is coordinating with external teams in this part of the quality process. How do we gather inputs? How do we generate flows of information? If we release something that people don't like, how do we know? Maybe we need to gather feedback. If we need to gather feedback and talk to customers, how can we talk to those customers? A lot of people ask me, what teams do we need to talk to? Everyone. Start from program management, project management, obviously your support, your services teams, your customer success, even documentation. Everyone will have feedback that they can get back to you. Okay, and as I mentioned, this is for me. This is for Joel in the context of practice. You need to think, how will this look like in your context? Which do you want to adopt and which way did I miss? Because, well, it's not my reality, it's your reality, so you need to make sure how to implement it. But the most important part of the whole talk that we have been doing for the last time is to go back to that original question that we have. What value do you provide your company today? My guess is that after we just talked about for an hour, then you have a little bit of doubts. Maybe you do know what value you provide, but maybe you have a little bit of doubts of what value you should be providing tomorrow. So once again, in order to help you think about that, think about what decisions do you want to help people make? How do you want to change the way your company will deliver products in the future? And how do you want to make the world different, because you're going to be a different person doing a different task within your company? Okay, how will you make your company behave differently? And this will dictate your value for your company as a quality engineer. And I think that it goes into that realization that if we're too busy doing testing all the time, then we're not going to be able to focus on quality. So we need to start focusing more on quality and maybe a little bit less on testing, because we're going to be able to delegate testing to other people in our organizations. Okay, and maybe doing less testing and doing more monitoring. You understand what I mean here. So with that, I wanted to thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to get questions. I'm not sure that people ask questions up to now. No, we have questions open. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now. This is also my contact info. This is my email. I don't answer fast, but I do answer all emails unless you're spamming me and selling me, I don't know, all sorts of stuff that I don't really need. But if you send me a question, I'll be happy to answer. This is my Twitter handle. I don't use it that much. I should maybe. And my blog sits on qablog.practice.com. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer. And if not, I'm here. Thanks for joining. And again, hope that you become more effective and value-adding testers, maybe by becoming more quality engineers. I'm going to stay here. If anyone has any questions, I will open my mic. If not, then thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye. Okay, so a question came, not so much on the Q&A, but a question here on the chat. How do you see the future of the industry? What do you think it'll go forwards, I guess that's the question. So one of the things that I do, and I mentioned it's the state of testing project where we ask people, how do they see the trends? And I need to say, hey, I think that testing is becoming very different in many organizations. We also see this in practice. We still have people working waterfall, and they're working great waterfall. So they don't have even any approach of going into DevOps. They will continue working in testing all the time and doing a great job on that. There are some people who are in the middle of that transition into Agile, so they're still 100% testers. And both waterfall and Agile, as they are, they will remain for a time, I think. Whether it's going to be 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, I think it will be more dictated on how we get into automatic coding more than automatic testing. The moment that we get code that writes code itself, then it will be a whole different ballgame, but for now, it's not going to change. I do see more and more people becoming quality architects and quality engineers doing a lot less testing. That I do see. And again, it doesn't mean that you're going to be doing test automation. That's only, again, test automation is testing, if you ask me. But focusing more on the process, on how do you actually implement that quality culture within your organization. So where's the future going to be? Part of it will still be in waterfall. A lot of it will be in waterfall, in Agile and DevOps. Modern testing will start becoming bigger and bigger with time, and only time will tell what happens after that. Another question here. Sorry if I missed it, but what do you think the ratio of developers to testers should be? Oh, this is a question that I've been asked too many times. There's no answer to that. As many as you need in order to have a stable process. I've seen companies where you don't have testers at all because all testing is done by other people. I've seen customers where they have, the typical is 1 to 3, meaning 1 tester for every 3 developers. But that also changes because if you need to test on mobile devices, then the amount of platforms was modified quite a lot. Do you count people who are doing offshoring or outsourcing or whatever? It's a hard question to answer. I think that you need to start somewhere, and you can start with one tester to every 3 developers if you want, but then start understanding who's the bottleneck. If the bottleneck is testing, then you need to add more people doing testing. Maybe it means developers doing testing. If the bottleneck is not testing, then you can let go some of your testers. I don't think that there's one answer for that. Sorry for that, Taylor. Another question here, how testers can be more persona tester instead of just testing engineers who focus on the technicality of the product. I think that the question here is how can we test more from the user's perspective? Oh, by the way, just follow up from Taylor here. He has 1 tester for every 8 developers. If you have 1 tester for every 8 developers, that means, and if it succeeds, it means that you have some pretty stable code. Maybe you have a lot of automation that keeps stability on. Maybe you're working on a DevOps project that you have a lot of feedback coming from the team. That should be okay. Again, I've seen places where they have 1 tester, 1 dedicated tester for 15 people, and it still works. It really depends on your setup. But back to the other question about how to become more persona tester, you need to get in touch with users. You need to, and if you can do it directly, meaning go into calls, it used to be faster and simpler when you would fly to places and you would go and visit them. But even if you take part of support calls or customer success calls to understand how people work, that will help. If you can get more information on how to validate, that would help. By the way, one of the things that we do a lot is talk to customers, okay, even if we don't visit them. And that will help you to bring more inputs into how to test more user perspective and only the technical stuff. That's a good question. Okay, we have time for one last question because it's already the top of the hour and I promised to be done on time. And again, you can still send me questions to my email. You can have it in there. Okay, so I guess we're done for today. Everyone, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between, thank you very much for joining. And we will be sending this recording later.